So sometimes when you're working with clay, you don't want to add anything to do a decoration. And there's lots of ways to work with what you started with and add decoration. One of those is to hit the clay. Good solution if you're not feeling very happy one day. The paddles, some of them have textures. Of course, you don't have to use just the texture that comes with the paddle. If you use the back end of the paddle and press something in, like fabric, you can get that texture. So here I have a paddled texture, I have a fabric texture, and both of those, as you can tell, went on real fast, right? I very quickly adjusted that surface. Now, lots of people like our rollers. We've got different kinds of texture rollers of various sorts. But in the same kind of area where we have texture rollers, we also have a bunch of odds and ends. Why do we have some of this? Well, it's because when you press things into clay, sometimes you find that pressing things into clay, this one you have to be kind of gentle with, but pressing different sorts of stuff into clay ends up with different kinds of look, decoration, and things like that. We've got a bunch of pasta over there, and the pasta just can be pressed in, so you have a bunch of bunnies or eggs or whatever you need to have. But of course, anything you can press into clay will leave a texture. So I've pressed little kids' shoes into clay. I've found seeds outside, rocks, pieces of wood. Here's a shell, right? And you can create some really interesting textures. And it's not always, you don't always realize what things look like. In fact, I have a pen over here, and you can kind of create an interesting set of marks by pressing a pen in here. Now we also have some tools that are made specifically for pressing into clay. So I've got stamps that have been made specifically for the purpose of pressing in. We have a variety of letter stamps over there. You can make your own stamp, so if you know what you want it to look like, or if you've, say, got a kid with an interesting texture on their shoes, you can press some clay into that texture and then keep press a little wad of clay like this and keep that texture for later. I'm kind of running out of room on that one, so I'm going to switch over to this one. We also have some tools that are specifically designed to do certain types of textures. So this is called a dragon scaler, and it can be used in either direction or a combination of directions to make sort of a scale pattern. Now, one of the things, I don't think I have, well, I have kind of a thing like this over here. If you use the end of a pen, or actually a pen cap, you can get a similar kind of repeated pattern. And when it's pressed into clay, sometimes a pattern emerges just because, it starts to look like something just because you've done a bunch of them, right? Even the back end of this. So don't be afraid to play around with stuff. If you've got an interesting object, or if you're walking to school and there on the ground in front of you is an interesting object, you can push it into clay. If your cat no longer wants to get brushed, right? Let's see, what else have I got here? We do have some ribs as well that are made specifically for cutting textures in. But you could also make a rib, a piece of a credit card, a lid of a yogurt container, a piece of milk jug. You can cut a pattern into the surface of that slightly stiff material, plastic or metal, and that can be used. This is a mass-produced one. We paid for this, but you can make some on your own that do a similar sort of thing. Even something like that, pressing it into the material, the tool, the stuff that's around you, can leave a kind of impression. Now, the other kind of interesting or fun thing, I think, is that if your clay is wet enough, you can come from behind and you can get some texture coming out. I'm actually going to finish this texture push out the clay into a sprig, and what I'm going to come up with is that texture. I could get that texture by using the sprig and adding clay, but I could also use it by pushing the clay out. This is a nice example of a piece where they've pushed the clay out into sprigs and the back of a shell and different kinds of things. In the inside, you can see that the clay itself has moved, but on the outside, you're just seeing those kinds of textures. This mark here, this lump here, is basically from just running their finger up the side of the clay. Their wall was a little bit thinner than mine, so it showed up better, and they didn't have a Band-Aid on. But you can slide your hand up that way and add the clay that way. So I've shown you some different ways to add textures without removing or adding clay, but there's so many I can't even like try stuff. Just look around and try some things. I actually have 2 more that I wanted to kind of show you, just because you get a sense of what they look like when they're done. These 2 pieces have sprigs added on, but behind the sprigs, there's a bunch of dots here. That's just the end of a pencil or pen, and it's been filled with an underglaze so you can see the texture. This one here, it was like a plastic piece out of a Lego kit, or maybe it was a piece of packaging. I don't even remember what it was, but it's been pressed in and then it's been highlighted with an underglaze to show that texture. And then of course the sprigs were added on afterwards. So have fun with this. Try some things out. Thank you.